Sawadika and good evening once again and welcome back to our special coverage on tonight's protest. I'm Nad Bunag and you're also with Kun Tulip Nak Sompop and Kun Tep Chayok.
And now let's go live to the Patuman intersection where the action has been over the past 1 hour. And as you can see from the picture, the police are now in control of the intersection after having driven away the remnants of the protesters who have been holding out in that area for the past 1 hour. But with the majority of the protesters dispersing, leaving the scene.
The protest leaders actually asked the crowd to go home already. And they said there will be another gathering reportedly tomorrow, but that wasn't clear yet. But they already asked people to go home and to stay safe because they don't want to have any loss of life. But of course, there is still some hardliner that is there to confront with the police, but not as many, not as much as the earlier in the evening.
Okay. But of course, there are still some pockets of protesters remaining around the area, but it looks like the confrontation between the two sides have now gone. The protest leaders, as Kun Tulip said, have told the protesters to go home and then to come back to regroup tomorrow again, but they didn't say what time that they would come back again.
What you see now is at the Patumwan intersection. It's where the protesters originally supposed to gather together. That they moved from the Ratchaprasong intersection, but right now, as you can see, it's filled with police officers, and I don't see any protesters on the street.
It is believed that the protesters have moved to different areas. One of them is Chulalongkorn University, which claimed itself as a safe zone for the protesters.
So the street is wet with rainwaters and water shot from the water cannon trucks. But it looks like the confrontation between the two sides is no longer there, with most of the, or all of the protesters vacating the intersection. And at the peak of the confrontation an hour ago, the police used high-pressure water jets to disperse the protesters who responded with projectiles. And so far, we have not received any reports about injuries or casualties on either side.
I believe on the left-hand side of your screen, the police officers have lined up at a bridge called Sapan Hua Chang. And on the other side of your screen, that is what's happening at Patumwan. So you can see that the two scenes are pretty much similar to each other because the police are lining up in case there's another confrontation with the protesters.
So the protest leaders repeatedly asking the people to go home. But right now we don't see as many as protesters as earlier, but there is still some there. And the police officer is still prepared to take action.
So it seems that according to latest reports from our reporters at the scene, there are now two small groups of protesters left. One group is rallying in an area near the Hua Chang Bridge, which is about few hundred meters from the scene of the confrontation. And the other group is on the campus of Chulalongkorn University. But the majority of the protesters have left the scene. And what you're seeing is the aftermath of the hour-long confrontation between the two sides, confrontation that was marked at times with scuffles and possible dispersion of the protesters by the crowd control police. So this is an area at the Patumwan intersection at the heart of the city.
The purple line you see is the skywalk, which earlier the police asked people to move away from the skywalk and all the crossing bridge. And reportedly, there are some police officers going up there. So right now, we still have a number of correspondents stay at the scene to giving you a live report. What you see now is actually what is happening at the area of Pathumwan intersection. It's live, it's directly from there, and you can see that some of the protesters are still there trying to erect another barricade.
As you can see, there are still a small number of protesters still trying to hold out against the police. Some of them are trying to set up barricades. But there are no indications whether or not the crowd control police will advance further, or they are satisfied with the fact that they have now retaken the intersection, which has been the scene of the confrontation for the past 1 hour. So the protesters began assembling at the intersection in the evening, and they originally they planned to rally at the Ratchaprasong intersection, which is about 1 kilometer away from the spot, but the area happened to have been blocked by the police, so they decided at the last minute to move the rally to Pathumwan intersection instead.
And just to give you an update, during the tension about an hour ago, Pathumwan District Court actually issued arrest warrant for 12 core members of the anti-establishment movement. One of the names that we're familiar with is Fort Pattep. Another one is Panupong Chatnok. And there's also a number of other people that has been prominent at the protest.
But earlier, at least 23 other key leaders of the protest movement were taken into police custody. And it's not clear where the remaining leaders who have been issued with arrest warrant are at the moment.
And so far, the police managed to occupy the Pathumwan intersection as well as Sapan Huatang, which is similar to what we showed you earlier. And I believe that the protesters are still there.
So these are the remnants of the protesters who are still holding out. We are not sure what their next step will be. Will they continue to keep the vigil later to the night, or will they retreat? It looks like they are retreating.
And the police, besides repeating the message, telling people to go home, they also said that if you dare gathering, making a protest, you are violating the state of emergency law. So they can be arrested. But we haven't really seen, there is a report of some arrests, but we haven't really seen the arrest yet, and it's not confirmed.
So an hour ago, this very spot was the scene of tense confrontation between the protester and the crowd control police. And at one point, the police used high water pressure jet to evict the protesters.
Reportedly, right now, there is a call for gathering at the Ratchathevi intersection.
And we can see that there are police trucks coming in already, and the protesters are moving out.
But there is not as many as protesters anymore. I believe lots of them actually leave the site. You can see ambulance getting ready.
So these are police vans. We don't know yet whether they are bringing in more reinforcements or they are here to take back some of the police personnel. Okay, we have been reporting the situation for the past almost 2 hours now, right?
Yes, since 6:30 we have been reporting live to you. I have a side information, thaiarmedforce.com, reportedly about that blue truck that used for spraying the high pressure water is actually imported from Korea, from Geno Motors, and it cost 24 million baht.
We're seeing now the scene from an hour ago at the height of the confrontation.
This is still at the Pathumwan intersection. And you can see that police officers still getting ready. I mean, ready to take action with their shield and their crowd control gear. And on the other side, the far side of the screen, you still see a number of protesters that refuse to disperse. It's still there with the umbrella and everything.
And you're seeing two different scenes, one at Sapan Hua Chang and at Pathumwan intersection. And if you just joined us, this is the live coverage of the protests tonight. And we've been reporting on this for about 2 hours now. And as you can see that the police are lining up, getting prepared in case there is another round of confrontation with the protesters.
And there are still the remnants of the protesters who are still holding out in front of the line of the police.
And if we can recap the three key demands of the protesters, one of them is for Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha to resign, a redrafting of the constitution, and a reform of the monarchy. And so far, there have been many core leaders of this protest that have been arrested, and that has angered these protesters and has made them come out and demand justice, as well as demanding other demands, demanding other things that they want to see changes. One of them, the biggest one, is for Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha to resign from office. And so far, the Prime Minister has made clear that he will not resign and he will not step down.
Releasing the protest activists has become one of their latest demands now. And that's something that has been shouting the whole evening, that release our friends, release our friends. It looks like the Pathumwan intersection, even though the police have retaken the spot, some of the protesters are still hanging out and in defiance of the order to disperse. We have not received reports about arrest yet, even though we have received information that arrest warrants have been issued for at least 12 key protest leaders.
The BTS actually announced that they are back to full service every station
So all
And-
the operations are back to normal
Yes.
and passengers can use all of these stations right now.
And it
And
looks like the high pressure water jet truck is still at work, as some of protesters are still holding out.
in the meanwhile, the protest leader is still asking the crown to go home because they don't want anyone to get injured. But there are some refuse to leave the site. But most protesters are now clear out of Pathum Wan intersection. And some of them right now heading to Sam Yan intersection. Still no injury reported.
So this scenes of confrontation between the crowd control police and some remnants of the protester has been going on for half an hour now. We don't know yet what the police next move will be.
Everything looked pretty standstill. They probably still see between each other. The police officer still ready to take action. But right now, like you can see, we don't see as many protesters as before anymore because most of them were asked to go home by the protest leader.
Most of the protesters may have gone home, some may have evacuated to other places, and we don't see many protesters compared to the hour before.
While the BMA spokesperson said that if anyone get injured, they have 5 teams of medical personnel to help treat the injuries. The one at Lotus Rama 1, another one at Stadium 1, the third one at Samyan Midtown, the fourth one at Pratunam intersection, and the fifth one at Chalerm Pao intersection. Or you can call 1669 for help.
And right now we're seeing live footage from Samyan area where protesters have evacuated, some of the protesters have evacuated to this area because Pathum Wan has been
Occupied by the
Occupied by the
officers
police.
already.
Okay.
So right now they're regrouping at Samyan intersection.
But these people have been told by the protest leaders to go home and come back again tomorrow. So Samyan is just a short distance from where the confrontation took place. It's about 1 kilometer, slightly over 1 kilometer away from the Pathum Wan intersection. So these people are among the protesters who have moved away from the Pathum Wan intersection and are taking refuge at this very spot as instructed by the protest leaders.
Now there's a rumor of rubber bullets, but the officer already confirmed that there is no rubber bullet used.
A lot of rumors have been flying around in the past 1 hour.
Yes.
Rumors about tear gas, and as Kun Tilt mentioned, rumors about rubber bullets being used, but all have been denied by the police officers in charge of the operation.
And Kana Rasadon Facebook page and the youth Free Youth Movement again post message on their social media asking people to go home. Seems like all the core leaders, all the core movement asking everyone to go home, but like we can see, a lot of them is still there.
And there have been reports from Sun Erawan which mentioned that there have been there have been 4 people with minor injuries and have been sent to the to hospital, and another person also received injuries and has been sent to Huaqiao Hospital.
So just to recap, the first round of confrontation was just before 7 p.m. when after warning the protesters that there will be some kind of action taken, the police side fired water cannon, high pressure water cannon into the protesters. That was the first round, and they still asked the protester to move out and go home, and protesters retract and erect another barricades and retract and also erect another barricade. The second time was after 7 p.m., about 7:15 for the second confrontation. So earlier today there were quite a few that we can see the police was using water cannon. There's some blue water which we don't know yet what it is. The protesters try to fight off with umbrella and try to erect more barricades, but the officers still able to advance anyway. So finally, they're able to occupy the Pathum 1 intersection that's supposed to be the gathering site of the protesters.
So this is a scene of the standoff between the protesters and the crowd control police at the Pathum 1 intersection, the scene that we have been seeing in the past 45 minutes. The police are showing no indications they are moving forward, and the remnants of the protesters are showing no signs that they are ready to retreat. And again, this is a scene from the Samyan intersection near the Midtown shopping center. And these are some of the protesters who have left the Pathum 1 intersection. And of course, many of them are waiting for vehicles, transportation to go home, which would not be easy to find at this moment because the areas around Pathum 1 intersection have been sort of not close to traffic, but of course have been avoided by motorists and people out of fear of the danger to their safety.
A few corrections to the previous report that the injuries so far from the protest, there have been 4 police officers that have been injured with only minor injuries, and 1 protester have been injured, and all of them have been sent to hospital. So apologies for that.
You can see that there's still a lot of protesters waiting around and gathered there, just right in front of the front line of the police officers, reportedly only like 4 to 50 meters away from each other. So there might or there might not be another confrontation, but if the protesters move in, or if at the end, or not the end, that if the officer will take action, they will warn first. They will say on a speaker first that they ask people to go home.
Of course, the police intention is for the remaining protesters to disperse and go home, but the protesters, the remaining ones, certainly are showing no signs that they're going to give up easily.
And may I repeat, if anyone is at the protest site, you can seek medical help or call 1669. 1669 if you want to seek medical help. And the following locations are Lotus Rama 1, Stadium 1, Samyan Midtown, Pratu Nam intersection, and Chalermpao intersection. So these are the 5 locations that you can seek medical help if you're around the protest site.
And if you heard a report of using rubber bullets, we got a report from our correspondents that the officer confirmed that they have not used the rubber bullets, because there are some media that report that. So right now we are seeing a standoff. What you see is the live coverage from Pathum 1 intersection between the protester that's still there, refused to go home, and the police officer. And on the right-hand side at Samyan intersection, there's some protester that move away from Pathum 1 intersection and now regroup at Samyan intersection.
We'll stay with the pictures for a while, waiting for further development. It's still unclear whether the crowd control police will try to move forward and disperse the remaining protesters.
Reportedly, there is some police vehicles heading to Samyan intersection where some of the protesters is regrouping.
I would say that at the peak of the rally today, there were thousands of people shouting slogans and calling on Prime Minister Prayut to resign and to release all the key protest activists who have been taken into police custody. And as you can see on the screen, there a truck carrying some of the protest organizers trying to passing by in the Samyan area.
And the protesters at Ratchathewi intersection also announced that they will stop the protest and they ask people to come back tomorrow. But like we can see, even though they have been asked to go home, there's still a lot of people gather around these 2 or 3 intersections at Samyan, at Ratchathewi.
As you can see, most if not all of the police personnel have removed their gas masks, because at one point many of them started putting on the gas mask, giving rise to fears that tear gas would be used against the protesters, but eventually nothing of that sort happened.
Only the blue water that we cannot identify yet what it is.
We don't have no idea yet what is happening to the 12 protest leaders who have been issued with arrest warrants, whether some of them or any of them have been already taken into custody. Because as we know that most of those who were arrested earlier were apprehended without the knowledge of the media until they were already put behind bars.
Yes, and they're still in police custody. But that doesn't discourage the protesters. There's still a lot of them come out, like we saw earlier today and yesterday evening too. And right now, if you ask some of the prominent figure of this protest, who is the leader, because a lot of them got arrested, their answer will be there is no one leader. Anyone can be a leader. That's what they said.
This is a scene from the Samyan intersection, and passing by was some of the police vehicles, and the protesters would not give up. Many of them taunted the passing vehicles and with many flashing the three finger signal, which has become a sign of defiance used by the protester against the Prayut government.
So there's a report that the speaker truck that carry protest leader already reached Ratchathewi intersection. You can see that it's raining right now, but people not give up. They're still there. A lot of them still there.
And this is the Samyan intersection. And right now we're still, and what we're seeing right now is the police force at Sapan Ho Chang. We don't see any confrontation at the moment.
There are still pockets of protesters remaining on some spots around the intersection. Sapan Ho Chang is one of them, and the areas in front of the National Sports Center is also another.
And while all this happening, the protest leaders is asking people to go home for their own safety and said that they will regroup again. They said going home is not surrender. So they're asking people to go home.
Let's pray that there will be no further violence, because that's the last thing that we want to see happen. So what happened tonight was sort of a combination of 2 days of tense situation that began with the rallying at the Democracy Monument on Wednesday, right? Before it snowballed into confrontation at the government house, where in front of which the protesters rallied overnight before they dispersed and then regroup at the Ratchaprasong intersection yesterday evening. And today they decided to move the rally to the Patumban intersection,
Yes.
where the confrontation took place.
I would say the protests yesterday finished earlier than a lot of people expected. They just asked people to go home around 10 or 11 p.m., about 10 p.m. And then today, before any action happened, the police already there, prepared to deal with the protesters at Ratchaprasong intersection. So the protester announced to move that gathering to Patumban intersection. Then the officials still there and try to disperse the crowd. So right now we see officers everywhere.
On the left side, the left-hand side of your, excuse me,
Right.
this right now you're seeing scenes at Patumwan intersection, and you can see that the police officers are still there. And we can see that the protests have escalated since Wednesday, 14th of October, where they rallied around the Democracy Monument and moved to the government house, and then at Rapasong yesterday, and today there's conflict at the Patumwan intersection. And we can see that the protesters seem to have evacuated from the area. Some of them may have gone home or moved to Chulalongkorn University or other areas that are safer.
And the officials asking everybody under the skywalk to get out of the area. But we still see some people walking around there, including the media.
So we expect this kind of confrontation to continue for quite a while, as many of the protesters still remain defiant and refusing to leave the scene. But it's quite clear that the police have completely taken over the intersection. But of course, we have no idea whether the intersection, which is in the heart of Bangkok, will be reopened to traffic tomorrow or not.
So what you see now at the Patumwan intersection, just only 2 hours ago, two and a half hours ago, there were confrontations between the protesters and the police officers. And then police able to occupy the area at the end.
And it seems like the police have put down their riot gear on the floor.
A sign that things are gradually sort of returning to normal.
We have to tell you that there is still some protesters that refuse to go home, even though their protest leader told them to just go home for safety. So we're not sure yet what is going to happen. But a lot of them is regrouping at Samyan area, not at the Pathumwan intersection anymore.
And of course, as expected, the whole incident has been under the spotlight of the foreign media, and it's become the headline news on the websites of many of the news outlets. And the pictures of police using water cannons to disperse the protesters certainly became the pictures of the day for most of these outlets.
There have been unconfirmed reports that some of the protesters at the Raj Tevi intersection, they've been told to stop the protest, to end the protest and the rallies today and to go home. And there have been reports stating that Chulalongkorn University is a safe place for protesters to evacuate at the moment. But there are no reports so far whether there will be another protest tomorrow and where it will be held.
So the BBC and Straits Times of Singapore and a few other media outlets among the international media, the organizations that have been covering the incident very closely.
There's BBC, the Straits Times, as well as Channel News Asia that have been covering the protests very closely.
I have to say this is the biggest gathering, biggest protest this year in Thailand during the COVID time.
Yeah. In fact, we haven't seen this kind of scenes since 2014. Remember this very spot, the protest led by Kun Sathep Thuk Suban was held here. I mean, the protest against the Yingluck government, and the crowd then occupied this spot for weeks. And the protest eventually culminated in the military coup d'etat in May the same year. So this spot is certainly not unfamiliar with this kind of political activities.
So that is the protest leader truck asking people to go home. They are trying their best to get people home, but like you can see, there's a lot of people refuse to go anywhere.
You know, in an unrelated development today, why Kun Piyabut Sangkanokun, one of the key leaders of the Khao Nam group, the reincarnation of the Future Thought Party, while he was holding a press conference at the Thai Summit building, a group of police barged in and sort of tried to interrupt the press conference, saying that he and his colleagues were violating the state of emergency by having 5 or more people for the gathering. So there was a sort of brief exchange between Piyabut and one of the police officers who led the police team.
So a lot of people thought that there will be some kind of arrest.
There were rumors that Kun Piyabut was the target of an arrest, but eventually The police were there only to sort of remind Piyabut and his colleagues that they were not in compliance. The press conference was not in compliance with the state of emergency. But he left without taking any legal action against Piyabut or any other person on the spot. And for a while, Piyabut gave this police officer a good lecture on the importance of civil liberty. And at one point, Piyabut told the police officer that you should stop acting like a robot. Stop acting as if you have no brains and just do what your superiors tell you to do. A good lecture from a very, very eloquent lecturer.
And many things happened today, even before the protest that occurred this evening, whether it's the raid of Kanakauna or the Progressive Movement group, as well as another big story for today, change.org has been blocked in Thailand after there has been a petition about the monarchy. So many things really happened today, as well as the incident there at Pathumwan intersection a few hours ago.
There's a report that the police officer actually setting up the water truck at the National Stadium. But as far as we know, there shouldn't be that many protesters there.
So on the left-hand side of your screen, that is what's happening at Samyan intersection, and we put that full screen for you to see what is actually happening at Samyan area. And previously, on the other side of it, that was Pathumwan intersection. And as you can see, some of the protesters are still there at Samyan intersection, holding umbrellas and are not going home at this time.
So that's it, the latest of the unfolding situation resulting from the rally at the Pathumwan intersection that ended with a forcible eviction by crowd control police. And as we have reported, there are at least 4 injuries, and all of them are reported to be the policemen. And we have not yet received a report of injuries on the part of the protesters yet.
Well, there have been reports saying that 4 police officers have been injured, as well as 1 protester, so a total of 5 injuries at the moment. But if there are more updates, we will keep reporting for all of you who are watching on our Facebook Live on Thai PBS World.
Also on Twitter.
We stay with the picture for a while. And
This is at Pathumwan at the moment, and we can see that the police have put their riot gears down. And now we're back at Samyan.
There was a lot of action ongoing earlier at the Pathumwan intersection.
so the question is, how many people will come back tomorrow for another rally, and whether or not the police will allow them to gather. Definitely not at the same spot, because that has already been taken over by the police. But with the new technology of the communications, the protesters have been quite shrewd in arranging or switching size of their demonstrations. For example, today, they originally intended to rally at the Ratchaprasong intersection as they did yesterday. But after seeing the area being blockaded by the police, they went online through the social media to tell their supporters or potential protesters to move immediately to the Pathumwan intersection, and thousands did.
And you can see some of the protesters are still flashing their 3-finger salute at Samyan intersection. And for those who have just joined, this is our live coverage of the protests in Bangkok. And you're seeing both scenes from Pathumwan intersection and Samyan intersection. And a few hours ago, there have been clashes between the police and the protesters, and it seems like there's no violence at this time, and the protesters at Samyan are getting ready to go home based on what we can see right now.
And we believe that the stalemate at the Pathumwan intersection will continue for quite a while. Why people at the Samyan intersection, which is about 1 kilometer away, most of them have started to head home. So we guess that the rest of the night will be sort of a stalemate like this.
And the protest leader is still trying to tell people to go home. It looks pretty quiet now, so much different from 2 hours ago.
Definitely a big difference, because 2 hours ago there was a very dramatic scene between the protesters and the policemen, and now it seems like the Pathumwan intersection is getting more quiet, and the policemen have already put their riot gears down, indicating that the situation is under control.
All right, so I think we will leave you with that. But if anything dramatic happens, or if there is any new development, then we'll come back to you.
And
But let's hope that there will be no more violence or any more clashes that would lead to injuries or severe casualties.
And you can just keep yourself updated on our Facebook and our Twitter.
And that wraps up tonight's special edition of Thai PBS World Tonight. Thank you very much for watching, and we will keep you updated if there are any more developments. So thank you for watching, and bye for now.
Good night.